Oh, that's funny. It's like I just walked onto stage from off camera in camera. All right.
I think we're live. So let's give folks a minute. Let's give folks a minute to walk in,
Yeah.
and then I am gonna share my screen and launch into this. All right. Okay. Welcome everyone. I see folks already chat in the chat. Ahmed, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Yeah. So as I get my slides in order and get things ready to go, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Looks like Gleb has already asked you to share where you're at. I would love to know if you ate anything delicious for breakfast, brunch, second breakfast, or elevensies. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and share this window, and we will be good to go. Okay, so you're all seeing my slides, but not my notes, which is what I love to see. Nothing in there you're not about to hear anyway, but just want to keep it clean, so to speak. Okay, let's begin. So welcome all. It's me, Leo, and my colleague here, Sung. So we are going to be leading you through this virtual hands-on lab. That's pronounced V-Hall, by the way. It rhymes sort of with U-Haul. Um, and this is going to be really focused, I think, maybe more than any other of one of these presentations you've ever been to on interactivity, getting you up and running, getting your keyboard involved. If you want, you're also welcome to just hang out, lurk, and observe. But it's highly encouraged that you give this a spin. Um, so let's get into it. By the way, great to see Jeff from Portland, Oregon. I'm over here in Eugene. Um, Emily from Boston. I spent a lot of time in Boston. And folks from all over the world are joining. Czech Republic, India, Indiana. Really cool to see.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that
Yeah, Sung,
overall
go ahead and
intro, Leo.
say
Yeah,
a
yeah.
word to intro yourself, please.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect segue. Hey, folks, my name is Sung, rhymes with lung, like the air you breathe, and excited to be here. Really excited to marry the experiences I've had, working at DPT Labs and also working at Datafold. And so this is just a really beautiful, better together story, and you're in good hands with Leo. I'll be the chat mod or champion, whatever you want to call it, within this chat and also in the public Slack. If you folks have access to that, the DBT community public Slack, to be very clear, just in case you want to persist some things or questions that are easier to access there versus looking at this recording. And so I'll moderate both places there, but feel free to use whatever is most comfortable for you. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Sung. And yeah, let's get into it. So we've got here, okay, a few slides to intro. You basically know who I am at this point. These are a few places I've worked. We can move right along from that. And this is Datafold. So Datafold is a company that we all work at, and we are building open source data-diff as well as Datafold Cloud. We're going to be focused on open source data-diff today. I'll touch on cloud at the end. So by the end of this call, you'll know what is a data diff, if you've never heard of one, or if you have, you'll learn more about them. We'll set up data diff in a real DBT project. We'll run some data diffs to see the tool in action. The idea is this is going to supercharge your DBT testing practices, in particular as you're developing, seeing the impact on the data as you code. And introducing again, Sung, who you just heard from. We're also in the DBT community Slack, and Sung is my esteemed colleague. He will be the chat champ, and I'll also keep an eye on the chat as well, especially as we get into the interactive section. So I will start with a little bit of an argument, if you will, as in I am making an argument. Do not worry, there will be memes and GIFs. So I have spent years, let's say, working in the data industry, not quite decades, but years. And I know how painful it can be when you make a data error. For me, it would always feel like I failed at my job, frankly. And I know that isn't really true, but that's how it felt. If you're a numbers person, It's really easy to feel like you had one job. If you can't get the number right, what are you doing? And so we're really here to try to make that not the experience you have, or really give you all the tools you can have to efficiently avoid feeling that way. And this is the outcome, again, we're trying to avoid. Not saying anyone's getting fired. I know that's I hate to even mention it in these times economically, but uh, even so, there can be difficult conversations. What are you doing, right? And so we want to avoid that experience. But this is a classic film, The Office Space, that I recommend everyone watch. Some great 90s references. Any similar experiences? So for me, I know I'll just share that one of my first data nightmares involved a dashboard I was in charge of building. It was my first data job. I was at a healthcare company. And frankly, the numbers were never quite right. I was struggling. I had data that kept changing, schemas that kept changing from upstream. I don't think I even knew what a schema was at that point. Date times were vexing me. Um, and it really mattered because the whole point of this dashboard was to tell executives whether this ML product we were building was having a positive impact on healthcare outcomes and spend. Um, so I would love to hear if you're willing to share any similar experience you've had, any data quality nightmare. We're not going to share outside of this room, and trust me that you are not alone in that. So please do share in the chat if anything comes to mind. I understand you might rather just share what you had for breakfast and not recall your deepest data nightmare. We are building data-diff because it doesn't actually have to be this way. The technology is there. I think it's a pretty interesting dynamic, actually, that data jobs and data technology has proliferated so rapidly, and yet we don't do something simple like check the value level impact on the data before we merge SQL code. I believe that's because as an industry, as an economy, we so quickly had to develop practices for managing frequently updated data, and we kind of just got used to this status quo, and it became normal to say, it should be fine. The code changes look fine. Let's just hit merge. Thank you, Jeff and Randall, for sharing. I will let the chat and not divert myself too much, but I really appreciate you sharing your hard-earned data nightmares. I share this image because the weight of all this does not have to be on the shoulders of individual developers. I know we're all familiar with how empowering the right tooling can be. We are trying to give individual developers superhuman capabilities to catch every mistake, either in their code or while they're code reviewing, so nothing hits production. So there's another problem that can happen other than these data fires that we're all used to thinking about, which is in an environment where you really can't have a data fire because it would destroy the business. And so progress grinds to a halt. Code changes stall in onerous, exhaustive reviews to prevent errors. And I think I got this image from the Harry Potter films. I believe this is Gringotts. The idea being that your data code and your data is locked away in a magical bank. So I want to review a little bit of the status quo here, and maybe we can do a pop quiz. And I will need your participation here. It is not anonymous. I need you to just type a letter into the chat. So what do you do today to check your work? A, nothing. B, ad hoc queries. C, DBT tests or other unit tests. D, dump to spreadsheet. And of course, the option E is other. And please specify. Getting a lot of B's and C's. We'll walk through each of these. So YOLO, just ship it. That's option A. I don't see anyone fessing up to that. A lot of B and C. I will admit that I have at times YOLO'd and shipped it. Not recently, but I'll cast one vote for that, but I've also done all the other things as well. Ad hoc queries, we all know these. Except statements, complex joins, um, you know the drill. These can work. They can also burn you if you are, essentially these are like either human written or human stored, human maintained queries. A different person might have a different approach. So at best, there's a level of inconsistency. We all know the feeling of kind of toggling between environments, whether it's your Snowflake, UX, etc. The repo where you've stored these queries, then you control, find, and replace the table name. DBT tests. This is a really important point. DBT tests, if you're using DBT, should absolutely be a part of your testing framework. So you should test for uniqueness of primary keys, not null, accepted values, and so on. So what DBT tests do not catch is if individual values shift by, let's say, $1 or 1 penny, or any number really, as long as it's in the accepted value range. You might have valid date times that shift a little bit or a lot, but they're still valid date times, and so they pass the DBT tests. If you have a first name, let's say your first name is Leo, imagine that. If that gets adjusted by, well, you could imagine a white space, you could imagine it getting duplicated to Leo. And there's definitely not a DBT test for that, because that just doesn't make sense in terms of how accepted values test works. So what we are focused on is helping you see the difference between the before and the after, between the staging and the production data, so that you can understand what the impact is if you merge the code. Am I getting somewhere here? Am I making my point clear about how important it is, I think, to see this information? And you can see it in a spreadsheet. And if that works for you, it's way, way, way better than nothing. I think you just run up against some of the kind of painful error-prone aspects of the querying approach as well. Is it happening on every table? Is every developer doing it? Are there different interpretations of how to structure this? Is it efficient? And so on. Can we get all this just to happen out of the box automatically and consistently? I like to say that Excel is like rocket science. I assume you're all laughing. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's make a change to, let's like review what it's like to make a change to a basic DBT model with those testing tools. So this should be a simple change. No, obviously it's not simple. You're changing your upstream source, and we've all been there. That could be a massive change with a massive impact on the data, even though it might look innocent if you just look at the DAG. And so this is what that code looks like. And keep that in mind. Some of these models are going to come back when we get into the interactive section. You might say to your teammate, hey, can you please review this PR? And they might not have much context. They might need to do a lot of digging to really understand what the change is, what the tables are. You can write a lot in a PR, but it's a lot to translate in your head from a code change to a data change. This is a diagram of what it might like to do manual checks on this kind of data change. Okay, so let's imagine the best case scenario. You and your colleague have time to do this rigorous deep dive into the data. Your DBT tests pass for uniqueness, your null value tests pass. So you might check for row counts between prod and dev as like a basic check. And you see the record counts are different. So already you found something, definitely good that you dug in. At that point, just digging in a bit more to that SQL approach that I mentioned before, kind of toggling around Snowflake and writing complex queries, you might write an accept clause to identify the exact records that differ. You might write an outer join to see full detail on the 11 missing records. You start to get a good idea. You start to be glad that you didn't just push straight to production. Randall has asked a question in the chat that I'll address. This does assume that source data for prod and dev are the same. If you're looking for value changes, much of this is solved by using SlimCI and DBT by deferring to the state of the last production run, because then any upstream dependencies can come from that last production run, and then the data will match. If sources have changed, we have some other approaches that we can recommend to handle that for models that depend directly on constantly changing sources. Probably best to chat offline on that one. But definitely agree. If upstream source data is shifting, you would see some data shifts, and it just kind of depends on the degree of that would make this would make you want to accommodate for that. So back to DBT tests. Again, all of your DBT tests passed. And so that's a point I want to make really clear. DBT tests, very important, very necessary, very far from sufficient. In this case, your whole test suite would have passed, and you would have maybe thought you were good to go, or you would have known in the back of your head, maybe I'm not. Same thing with downstream DBT models. All those tests pass, and they all built successfully, but just because there's no code change in the model, it doesn't mean there's no data change. So you might have a code change in an upstream model, dim-orgs, that adds a where clause or changes a value that's used downstream in a case statement. So even though the downstream model has no code change, it may have data changes. And finally, this is an example of how we might approach this in a spreadsheet of your trusty VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, depending on your vibes. We've all been there. And I think I've kind of touched on some of the challenges there, such as the rocket science issue. And just in general, it's tough to automate this stuff. It's a lot of manual work. All of this assumes we have time, motivation, and superhuman discipline, I would argue. So all of the approaches I just mentioned would help, without a doubt. The biggest problem, and I've alluded to this, is that you do have kind of a human error problem, or maybe it's just a busyness problem, where we can't realistically expect everyone to do this every time. And even if they do, we can't realistically expect them to do it the exact same way every time. There's a level of subjectivity, and by having this automated, we can ensure that we're at least working from the same baseline and the same logical approach, which could be adjusted, but we'd be kind of making a decision as a team. What is a data diff? So I think as I've evolved this talk, done this talk a few times, I think I've kind of spoiled a little bit of this part. So I'm going to zip through these slides because I think I've made it kind of clear what a data diff is. But basically, you've got your code diff, left-hand side, you see right-hand side, you see the changes. Data diff is the same thing. Left-hand side, right-hand side, you want to see the exact changes. For me, this is a light bulb moment because when I look at a code diff, it really doesn't show me what the data diff is. That's all there is to it. That's the whole argument. And so you look at a code diff, you have to do a lot in your head to get to the point of actually what is the impact here. So let this image sear into your mind. I hope you never forget it. Okay, so now we're ready. Thank you for bearing with me for my thesis here, my argument. We're ready to talk about how to combine data-diff, the open source Python package built by Datafold, with DBT and what that looks like, and then we'll dive into it. So sticking with basically the same code change that we just talked about, we can use data-diff to accomplish pretty much all the testing we covered earlier, but truly in a fraction of the time. So to run data-diff with DBT, all you have to do is run data-diff DBT following any DBT run. It'll compare the data from the DBT run in development to the same models in production. It'll find differences in it'll find every single difference between the tables. So this is what it looks like in action, and this is what we're about to build on your computers. Hopefully, at least a few of you will play along with me here. And if we look at the output a little more closely, you can see updated rows, unchanged rows. So the idea here is you'll have like absolute clarity on what the difference is, both in terms of rows added and removed, and any differences that exist in columns that have common primary keys. And again, this is just simply adding data-diff dbt following a typical dbt run. We will also see how this can be applied to the downstream models. I mentioned that data impact can ripple downstream, and that is straightforward to do. Vladimir has asked about giant tables. We don't have out-of-the-box sampling in our open source tooling. That is functionality we support in our cloud tool. So that would be one of the reasons you'd want to explore Datafold Cloud if you're working with massive data. I will note that in our open source tooling, you can apply in the dbt YAML a where key, which you can then use to filter any way you like. I would guess most likely recent data would be a reasonable approach. You can also use dbt's node selection syntax, the select flag, and then you can select any old model or downstream. So you don't have to, you can do it kind of this way where it runs all at once, or you can just do data-diff dbt and then -- select and then select any model. So it doesn't depend on a dbt run actually running. It'll just compare dev to prod no matter what dbt models are flagged in the select flag. Okay, so I think it makes sense to move right on to the hands-on demo. So again, thanks for bearing with me. This is going to be, I'm going to unshare here, and then I'll reshare at the end. I need to reorganize my screen for a bit. But what I'm going to have up on the screen, I'm going to start with this, a branch of a GitHub repo. I'll ask you all to load that. And then I think you can see my desktop and the README here. So if you'll bear with me here, I'm going to now open a VS Code window. If you run into trouble in any of this, please don't fret. Live coding is sometimes just doesn't work. And if you want to sync up separately, set up a call and try to get this running on your own, Sung or I would be more than happy to do that for you. But hopefully a lot of you are able to get up and running. And so let's get started. So I think you can all see my screen now. Ignore that message. That's going to go away in a minute. So what I've done is I've opened a VS Code window, and I have navigated in the Explorer to a folder that is empty, and I'm going to use almost empty, and I'm going to use that to import a Git repo branch. But let's step back a bit. So the prerequisites here are going to be Python, Git, and a local development, just like VS Code. So that's what we're seeing here. And then I'm just going to walk through this README with you. And I'll be very explicit, so hopefully I'm not over-explaining things, but I think you'll find this interesting, I hope. So one thing I've learned in doing this is you can actually click this copy and just paste the whole thing in here, multiple lines, and it'll all run. So this is just the first step. Make sure you have these packages installed. If you don't, you could try to install them now, but there might not be time. So, but that's just something to make sure you have those prereqs. And then once you're there and you're in your repo, where you want to install a new subdirectory, you can go ahead and copy all of this. So what you're doing is you're git cloning this repo. This is a dbt project. And then you're navigating into it using the cd command, and then you're going to check out a branch. So I just pasted all 3 lines there. I'm going to make this a little bigger, hopefully, and press enter. And then that warning goes away because now we're in a project. Please ask questions in the chat if you have any. I might be able to answer. More likely, Sung will jump in. He is a wizard at these things and will help you if possible. Okay, so the next step is to just walk me through these code changes. We're going to create a virtual environment, activate it. This is where we install data-diff, a couple other packages to get you up and running in a dedicated virtual environment. And then, yeah, that's covered in these 2 steps. Making sure you have the good version of pip, installing what's in these requirements, and you can see right there what's going to be installed. And then this is a step that will be necessary if you have this variable set, so I recommend everyone just run it. Because if you don't have it set, it will have no impact. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, run it all. And this does take a minute, but no more than a literal minute. So great. Okay. Okay, so now we're ready to actually run a dbt command. So hopefully you're feeling a level of excitement here where you're like, wait a minute, did I just set up a new dbt project and I'm going to be able to like build the whole project right now on this demo, on this call? What? And that is powered by DuckDB. You can see by the name of the branch. And the idea here is the whole database is handled in the project. So no need to connect to Snowflake. Obviously, in your production environment, you may need to connect to an external warehouse, but that would be handled pretty quickly, actually, by your dbt profiles. So relatively out of the box, and I'll get to where that's set in a moment. So, but the first step is building your dbt project, and then I'm also going to build the baseline development tables. So you can just run these. There's no need, I think, to adjust any settings. And then I will walk through what you need to update in the dbt project YAML, but because I think that question came up, but it's not necessary for you to change anything for this demo. So basically, you will need to add these lines. And this is, let me just pull up our docs. I think I might be, oh yeah, here we go. So you can kind of see here, if you were doing this on your own, you wouldn't be using the DuckDB demo. You would be looking at our docs, installing, configuring, and this is where we mention, you know, a few things about how to configure your dbt project YAML. So I know it looks like a lot, but trust me, I just got to the bottom of the page. It's actually not that much. Most of it's optional, but we tried to cover all the scenarios you might encounter. Okay, back to the demo. So we've built our prod, we've built our dev. Now, sorry about my cold. For those of you who were on my demo last month, this is actually a different cold. So don't worry, different cold. All right, so by the way, this is a handy trick in VS Code if you don't know this already, multi-line select. So Command Shift, I'll do it again. Click, and then holding down Command Shift, click down here and it'll select all of these, and then you can go boop, boop. And what I'm doing is I'm commenting out this dev code, and then I am commenting in this prod code. So the idea is now I am updating the file so that it has a new version of the SQL, and this is going to be familiar from the examples. Okay, so once you've done that, this is the moment This might be the first time for some of you where we run our first data diff. So I'm going to copy this line. This is just going to run a single model, dbt run s dimorgs, and then diff it between production and development. I'm going to make this a little bit more visible for this big reveal. Okay, so the model builds, and it diffs. So again, this is basically the same output you saw in the slide deck. So that shouldn't be too surprising, but my hope is that seeing me do this from scratch in about 5 minutes, maybe some of you were even able to do it yourself in this time, is convincing that this is something you can actually use in your VS Code development process at the command line. So we can see a lot of rows are updated, a few are unchanged, and then the created at column has some significant changes to it. I'm going to run this next line, and what that's going to do is diff all the downstreams, because those might also have a data impact. I swear I'm not drinking tea to become Kermit the Frog meme. I'm just enjoying some tea. Okay, so where are we? Yep, so we built all 4 models. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then each of these diffs is displayed at the command line. So here's that same model that we saw, but also all the downstreams. Note that the code has not changed in the downstreams, but indeed the data has. Financial data, sales sync data, more financial data, stuff that seems like it might matter. I did mention that you can run just a single model with a select statement in the data-diff command. So this comes in handy because you might not you might run your whole DBT project for whatever reason, and then want to only diff one model, and you don't want to rerun that model. You just want to specify to run that model. And so that's how you would do that. By the way, it looks like Sung in the chat, thanks for helping out Mahui, who might have some memory issues on the machine. I hope that that's something we can sort out. If there's anyone else who has questions or is stuck, has questions about any aspect of this, please let me know. It would also delight me so much if any of you are having a successful experience right now and want to share that as well. That would give me a sense of validation and confidence. But I will not take it personally if it's not working. We want to know either way. I hope at a minimum I'm at least convincing you that it can work, and we can set up time after to go over your specific use case. And it looks like we've got David up and running. I love it. Okay, so I think I am going to wrap up the demo portion, except for, let's see, I do want to show you one more thing here, and I'm going to deviate a little bit. This is where I'm going to blur some lines between open source data-diff and Datafold Cloud. So bear with me on that. But the reason this is an appropriate time to show you this is because what we are going to look at is, I'm going to run data-diff dbt, is how you can run data-diff dbt in your dbt project. Now, if you are a Datafold Cloud user, the other thing you can do is add the cloud flag to the same command. And what that will do is it will actually run the diff in Datafold Cloud, which has, so it gives you this link here, and then it pulls Datafold Cloud for the results. And I'm just going to jump into the cloud results and show you that. So the real advantage here is what you're going to have is a summary that's pretty similar to what you saw in the command line. A little bit more detail, and you can see this finished calculating here. Updated rows, unchanged rows, a little bit more detail, but the real thing is that you can actually see the value level differences in this interface. Of course, you can also store the results, share them with your team. I could go on. The session isn't designed to be focused so much on Datafold Cloud, but just while we're on the setup piece, I wanted to call out that that is a big reason to be using the cloud flag, is that you might want to see the value level differences. You might want to see any distribution shifts. So you can kind of see here this long tail of a distribution of values disappears from the development environment, and so on. Okay, I'll touch a little bit more on some Datafold Cloud features at the tail end. But for now, I'm going to switch back to my slideshow, wrap up a little bit, and then, as I mentioned, circle back to Datafold Cloud. So to review what we just did, hopefully, how easy was that? With data-diff dbt tagged onto a normal dbt run, you cover your bases on testing automatically, consistently across your team. So this is just a little bit of a review on truly how easy it is to set up in your environment, not just in this demo environment. Install data-diff, pip install data-diff, configure your dbt project, and that's what this is the section I just flashed in front of you in the docs. Importantly, you do need to set your primary keys. We require primary keys in order to run a data diff to compare values on the row level and the value level. Fortunately, this can be accomplished by using dbt uniqueness tests. So if you have uniqueness tests in place, we'll just pick up the primary keys from those. We'll assume those should be the unique rows. Makes sense. But you can also override that with a tag. I'll note this also works across composite primary keys. Everything I'm saying now, by the way, applies to both Datafold open source and Datafold Cloud. I'll try to clarify when there's a difference that would matter. And then run with dbt. So just like we did, you can select a model. You can run it as separate commands. You can there's a where flag you can add. I think I might mention that in a minute. And yeah, I mentioned a couple of the features that you've seen. I showed you the select flag. I don't think I showed you the where flag, but that's a pretty handy way of filtering these tables before they get diffed. So that might address one of the questions earlier about if you have 30 million rows, how do you handle that? The filter applies to both sides. And that concludes the hands-on version of this demo. So really appreciate your time. Kira has helped to organize this whole thing and really come up with a vision for it. Sung, my chat champ, and local command line wizard, and open source denizen. And yeah, I do want to touch on a couple of things in Datafold Cloud as well. Maybe we can kind of walk through that together, Sung, and take any more questions that are in the audience. Oh, and finally, if anyone is dropping off at this point, I do want to touch on our announcements. We have Datafold Cloud Demo Day, so that'll be a full dive into Datafold Cloud. I'm just going to touch on it for 5 or so minutes here. Yeah, so that's our next event. We have these sorts of events all the time. Question from Emily on VS Code. So everything we just walked through does work on open source and Datafold Cloud. The cloud flag is where the distinction comes in. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure
She's
if
talking about the actual VS Code extension.
yeah, so the VS Code extension, we have actually opted as an org to deprioritize. So I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be available, for the foreseeable future. I don't know if there's an end date, but we're really trying to focus on this dbt open source experience as well as Datafold Cloud, and we found we were spread a bit thin and not getting the traction we were looking for from the VS Code extension. So sorry to be a bummer in delivering that news in this format, but that is the decision at this point. Pour one out for the VS Code extension. Okay, so let us dive a bit more into some of the things I wanted to touch on in Datafold Cloud. Namely, I want to mention our Lineage capability, the ability to diff between databases and kind of set that up to occur on a recurring basis, and some of our BI app integrations are kind of what I was thinking of touching on. I don't know if, Sung, there's anything you would want to add there.
No.
Beautiful. Any observations, Sung, on your end from the chat or just from this session?
No, I think you did a pretty good job of
Thank you,
just
sir.
like having a self-contained example. I don't see many debugging issues except for one. And so, Abdelaziz, if you want, happy to follow up in async through the tools Datafold channel to go through that. We just got a question in from Jeff. Is data-diff open source or cloud easy to include in the Git ci process? I can take that question while you're setting up, Leo.
Well, and that reminds me, I probably omitted the main thing I should be showing off about Datafold Cloud, which is the CI integration. So why don't you start, Sung?
Yeah, I'll give you the short answer of this. So both you could use in your Git ci process. When it comes to Datafold Cloud, we have that natively. So what Leo is showing off right now is just comes out of the box. All you have to do is just set up a couple settings within Datafold, and you're off to the races. And then two is with data-diff in your CI process. At most, they'll give you those summary level stats that you saw earlier in this conversation, but it won't give you that full hyperlink in the history to the value level diffs that you probably care about. And so, yep.
Yeah, the other thing I will note is that kind of fundamentally the way we were envisioning this, and I don't know if we're right or wrong here, but what we had in mind is that the command line experience that I walked through would be something that folks would tend to use in development even before opening a PR. We actually went to market with just the CI integration that you're seeing here, and so this will automatically diff the modified models. It'll identify any BI dependencies, like Sung said, and then it'll also diff any downstream models. In this case, they were skipped because that's a configuration, but if you scroll down, you can see now they were diffed. So this is how Datafold started, is the diffing in CI. And we learned from people that they really wanted to be diffing in VS Code, and they really wanted to be diffing before they opened the pull request, because that sets off all other sorts of bells and whistles. And so that was kind of the origin of this use case that we were envisioning for the command line tool.
Yeah. And just to add some more color to that, ever since I joined, and I think it's important just to understand just the vision and design philosophy we have for both this open source utility and Datafold Cloud. And this is included in our most recent README if you need some, extra evidence there. But essentially, we wanted to make sure data diffing just as a design pattern in your workflow is just so absurdly normal. It's just silly to think that you're not doing that, right? And this isn't to shame anyone. It's just like, hey, we want to provide that easy entry point in order to do so. And so we created data-diff, the CLI tool, to create just a great single player experience to do that during development in VS Code and your terminal. But to really get the multiplayer experience and provide the high fidelity things that you're seeing here with value level diffs, column profiles, diff history, having that level of robustness, it requires just a team that just like is dedicated to maintain that and sustain and evolve that. And so when you're thinking, hey, like what's a great single player experience? Data-diff CLI. Hey, I want to make this multiplayer, Datafold Cloud. That's it.
Yes, so thank you, Sung. Very helpful. So yeah, I'm just pulling this back in. I clicked on this link from CI. It brings you to Datafold. Hopefully you have the information you need in this printout and you can just review it like you would a note in a pull request. But often you might want to say, okay, well, what are these differences? You can see them right here. You can see any rows added or removed. So I was starting to show a little bit of our lineage capability. So this would be, again, part of Datafold Cloud. Basically what you can do here is track column level lineage all the way through your data warehouse and down to BI. So in this case, you can see a Tableau data source and the columns in their upstream dependencies. Here you can see a high touch sync. So hopefully you can really see everything. Today we support Looker, high touch, Tableau, Mode. We're looking at building out Power BI and kind of onward from there. But the idea is you'd be able to really see exactly what impacts if there was something wrong with this usage. So the whole table gets highlighted. That would mean there's some kind of where clause. So it's kind of everything is the table, not a specific column, is impacting the table. If you click on org ID, looks like this is based on dependencies or filters on these exact upstream columns. There is a question. Yeah, so we do actually have a GraphQL API. So that is Datafold Cloud. And we could definitely have a conversation about how that might be integrated with a third-party tool. We see people using the GraphQL API to query Lineage to hook up to, for example, non-DBT orchestration systems and determine what to diff, or even just to do data governance initiatives unrelated to diffing. One thing that I like to call out about our column level lineage here is that it's not actually based on the DBT manifest. So this will catch everything in the warehouse. It'll show you the SQL query that actually built the table. So I have found myself exploring this when something's wrong in Looker. I want to see what's upstream, what column, what table is related to the metric that, or the dimension that's broken, and then I can just copy paste this straight into Snowflake and troubleshoot from there. So that's more of like a deep dive investigation. And I'll answer this question to Emily since it's so topical. Yeah, so data app dependencies, we do create, I can actually show you this right now. We create a integration with, so you can see here all of the integrations that we create to keep all this up and running. So if you were just running diffs, all you would need to do is select your data warehouse. This is not exhaustive. These are just the ones in this demo account. If you are setting up CI, you would set up a GitHub integration. You can see a bunch of test accounts here. And then your DBT core, your cloud, or if you aren't using DBT, we have an SDK that would support non-DBT orchestrators. And then to your question, Emily, yes, this is what the Looker demo looks like, or the Looker integration looks like. I am not going to click in because I think there might be some semi-sensitive data in there, but what I can do instead is just show you in our docs. I was just helping someone with this. So it looks basically like this. You create an integration. We do use the Looker API, the Tableau API, etc. So we have dedicated infrastructure to connect with that. And then that's pretty much it. That's how then we connect, the columns and dimensions in Looker to upstream. Hope that helps. Definitely feel free to ask a follow-up. Awesome. So I think I also wanted to touch on an exciting new use case that we've been building out over the last 6 months or so, which is cross-database diffing in Datafold Cloud. So I'm just going to pull up, we have a bunch of examples lately. I'm just going to pull up one. So this one is at a relatively small scale. I don't know if some you happen to have a larger one handy, I would definitely take it.
I don't, but
That's
I think
fine.
this can illustrate it too.
Yeah. So I know we can comment on the performance. So basically, same thing, but same thing in terms of the data diff, but you have the ability in Datafold Cloud to diff between databases at a massive scale. Really fast performance. So if you were comparing 1.2 million rows, just off the top of my head, that's a number I have in my head, between Postgres and Snowflake, that diff could run in 15 seconds. So if you let that sink in for a minute, what that means is, selecting all that data and moving it to a place where you could run a data diff between them would take a lot longer than 15 seconds and take a lot of compute and a lot of network storage. So there is some real engineering involved in actually orchestrating across database diff. It's not a trivial problem. And so what we've been working with folks to do is support their migrations, make sure the data, you have exact parity between your legacy database and your new. You might be moving from SQL Server to Snowflake. We support diffing between SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, a whole bunch of others. So that is something that you can set up using our either our API. You can create diffs in the UI, kind of like this, pretty straightforward. Click through, select your tables, or you can also set up scheduled diffs within Datafold Cloud. So it really just depends on the style of your migration, or you might want to validate like ongoing replication. All the same reasoning, really need to compare every value to know things are working. So I think that pretty much covers what I was hoping to touch on. I know I want to be respectful of folks' time. There is a lot more we could dig into with Datafold Cloud, but again, wanna honor people's time here. So it looks like Jeff got his question answered. We will definitely send out the recording. And any last questions we can help with? I know we're a little bit over.
Yeah, just as a call to action for everyone, if you want to, talk with us more, get a more tailored demo, just have some questions for us. Leo, do you have a Calendly link handy to both of our respective schedules?
I can get that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll put that in the chat and just make it really easy for you folks to work with us here. All right?
Here, I'm gonna unshare so you don't I don't TMI my Calendly to you, but I will drop that link in the chat shortly. Do you mind answering Ritika while I get that, son?
Yeah, good question. So, Ratika, by default, yes, but there are two ways of how we get that. One, we can infer that from the first column that has a unique test on it. So typically when people are writing out DBT like tests and configurations on top of their SQL, they usually have the first column as the primary key. And if it's unique, if there's a unique test on it, then we'll infer that as primary key. If you're like, hey, like I actually want to make it really explicit, you can do something that looks like this in the chat. Actually, where you add that tag with between the brackets and single quotes, primary key, and you're good to go.
I didn't catch if you mentioned this, but if a model lacks a primary key, we will run just a simplified diff. Check the row counts, check for, I think, null values, etc. Or not null values because there's no primary key, but you get the idea. We'll do what we can in the absence of a primary key, so it doesn't break Datafold, but it's better to have one.
Yep.
The other thing to know is that yeah, it doesn't need to be technical. Just needs to be unique. I think I heard you say that, and it is it can be composite. It can be kind of any made up combination of columns. Just kind of depend. That'll impact the results. And then James' question for open source: are those diff queries running against our own warehouse? So yes, I think I saw. I think Sung, you answered this, and the answer is yes, right? So that
Yeah.
it's whatever database you connect to. So in this demo, it was DuckDB, so that's all local. So yeah, definitely something to be aware of in terms of if you're like, you don't want to just run diffs willy-nilly without thinking about it. I would think about it in the same realm as building your DBT models in development. So it will be roughly equivalent in terms of like if you build a DBT model from scratch, diffing that model against the production version will be kind of a similar resource consumption. And so just like you don't constantly and like sort of without thought build DBT models, you would want to think the same way about diffing. The hope in our theory here is that the value would greatly outweigh the cost. We're not in the business of setting up, queries that run automatically and constantly and run you to the ground. That's not the point here. The power is in your hands. And James and Jeff, yes, indeed, all the queries would be in the query history. So if you are using a dedicated warehouse and or user for Datafold activity, that would give you crystal clarity into what's going on. I don't think we support tags in the data-diff command, but that is definitely sounds like the kind of thing I could imagine us supporting in the future. Just it's kind of in the same realm as a select statement or a filter out of the box DBT behavior. So that's where we're at now. Good idea. Don't support it today. And yeah, to your point, James, and thanks, appreciate your good humor when as I say no. I will say that a workaround might be if you have like only those models exposed to Looker, if you have a folder structure that might make it easier, that select statement would get you hopefully at least part of the way there. You could select on the folder level or use any DBT selection syntax. Well, I am not going to be the one to cut us short. If people have more questions, I have all hour at least, I think. But yeah, feel free to please jump in if anything else is on your mind, or just book time with us to chat more. Let's give it a minute or so for folks to jump in. All right, I think I might have done the trick by teasing that the questions weren't going to stop, and now they've stopped. Great. Well, thank you all for joining again, and really appreciate it. I hope some of you got this up and running and had a good time and tolerated my jokes. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Have fun diffing, y'all.